Right, all right. Hungan. Okay. All right. Matotsotso. Matotsotso pago todo nenga. Hungan betek todo estiguini. Hungan nenga betek todo esti. Hungan. Yep, we are live. Hungan. We are live on YouTube, Estegaigigi, YouTube, Gaigigi, Facebook, Zen Instagram, Lokwe. All right. Biba, biba,
Half a
biba.
day, Tiro.
All right, half a day. Buenos todos, Hamzu. It is 2026. It is another episode of Fanachu. I am your host, and today we are talking about weaving indigenous and environmental solidarity at COP30 in Brazil. And I am very excited because for many of you, you may have seen images and video of indigenous resurgence, protest at the UN climate conference in Belem, Brazil last November. And there was Chamorros that were there. And so out of all, at a gathering of almost 200 different countries from around the world, there was Chamorro activists, cultural practitioners who were there as part of the protests, as part of the activities that were there. And I'm very excited that two of those who were there, Moñeka de Oro from Micronesian Climate Change Alliance and Roquin Siongco, who is a weaver, is here, and they will be talking and sharing about their experiences in some, just even watching the video and hearing the news that was happening. Um, I am so excited to hear from both of you about what you experienced because as we know, Chamorro voices are often left to the side. We are often ignored in these types of forums. And so the fact that Chamorros from the Marianas were there, participating, working with others, making sure that, you know, that our interests were represented is so special. And so I'm so glad to have the both of you here. And so, Kosinya and introducing my Semzu Dididi, can you introduce yourselves first? And so, Puente Muñeco, Hogo Finit na put favor.
Yeah, Tiro, half a day, Guahusi Moñeka Dioro. I'm a mother and a longtime protector and community organizer with lots of different organizations over the year, but more recently with Micronesia Climate Change Alliance. And yeah, happy to be here to share what a transformative experience it was going to Belem and being with a really strong Indigenous force that showed up at the climate proceedings. And yeah, just building more solidarity from the Pacific and with our brothers and sisters from the Arctic to the Amazon.
Esse se talo por ifinatopmo zan aroken por favor hago pago.
What is an Hafade, Guahusi, Roquin, John, Quichocho, Siongco, zooming into you from the island of Guahan, Digo specifically, uptown, represent. Yeah, I was very fortunate to be a cultural ambassador in a way, working alongside MCCA to be representing the Marianas over in Brazil. And yeah, just leave it there, echoing what Muñeca said. Just an honor to be alongside fellow Indigenous people from the Arctic to the Amazon. And yeah, we'll talk about that shortly. So thank you for being here today, everyone.
Oh, Biba, Biba. And so first off, one of the things that I find is a little bit unfortunate is compared to some other Pacific Island groups, I think Chamorros, because we imagine ourselves to be a little bit closer to the United States, issues of climate, the ocean don't affect us as much, right? Because so many of us served in the military. We think we live right outside a Walmart sometimes, and that Walmart is going to save us from the rising waters or something like that. Or, oh, we just if anything affects us too much, we're just going to move right next door to Las Vegas. There's a lot of Las Vegas out there, plenty of room for us Chamorros to go to. And so a lot of times when I speak to people, if you look online, they don't think that these things about climate change affect us. Because even though we live on an island, we're trained from our youngest age to think of America and so on. And so things like the United Nations, COP30, climate change, they don't know much about that. And so I think that's why I'm so glad that the two of you are here and that you were there, because I think even when people in Guam and the Marianas were seeing those images, they were thinking, oh, look at those, tribes. They're fighting for their survival, and they weren't making the connection. And so can you first off just talk to us, what is COP30? What is this United Nations climate change? Because I think more has happened recently, especially with the younger generation, where they understand that there are other islanders who are fighting the rising waters. They're fighting for their existence. But I think more needs to be done for your average Chamorro to understand that it should be our fight too. And so either of you, Moñeka, if you want to go first, for example, what exactly was COP30? What is the United Nations climate change conference, just so people understand what was this gathering that both of you attended?
Yeah, and just wanted to address that, for us in the Marianas, we very much do feel the impacts of climate change already. We've had major storms that have caused billions and billions of dollars of damage. Ones that come to mind are Typhoon Sodalor, Typhoon Mawar. And so these climate events are very disruptive to our economy and to our livelihoods. We know what it means to live without power and water for weeks on end. And these types of storms over the last few decades have been intensifying and increasing in frequency. And that's just one of the major things that we've experienced in our region, alongside coastal erosion because of sea level rise and some other real deeply troubling existential threats that climate change brings already to our shores. And so the Pacific is definitely on the front lines of climate change, and there's been a lot of activation from Pacific sovereign nations at what is known as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is a long name. It also goes by the UNFCCC, and this COP30 was the 30th time they've met. So they started meeting in the early 90s, and it's the principal global treaty for coordinating international responses to climate change. Some of the biggest meetings were the establishment of the Kyoto Protocol in the 90s, as well as the updated Paris Agreement that happened in 2015. And because of our political status in the Marianas, both in the CNMI and in Guahan, we don't have delegations sent there to be a part of these treaty negotiations. And so we rely on our colonizer governance to sort of speak for the experiences and advocate for the needs of our people here. Whereas in the FSM and in Palau and in our closest neighbors, they're able to have a seat at the table and to negotiate with all the countries of the world. There's over 100 and I believe 40 negotiating countries, nation states, which is an issue unto itself, that go to these annual conferences that have become increasingly co-opted by corporate interests, by fossil fuel lobbyists, and it's become a place that's definitely, as you saw in all the videos of Brazil, unwelcome and unsafe for people who want to challenge the establishment and challenge the global powers that run our economy that's based off of fossil fuels, which is fueling the climate crisis. So I hope that was a succinct sort of comprehension of what the UNFCCC is, what COP30 was. And this year it just happened to be in Belem, Brazil, which is the gateway to the Amazon. And the Amazon is, of course, one of the most biodiverse and important natural resources in the world. It's a carbon sink, and it provides a lot for our whole world in regards to oxygen. And it's been increasingly developed and under threat. And so thousands, I think 15,000 to 20,000 Amazonians from throughout throughout South America came to Belem and descended upon Belem. And of those thousands of people that came, only about A couple hundred were badged into the UN proceedings. And so that's why there was a really visible push to gain access. And we saw all of those videos of them rushing into the COP on the very second day of opening.
Roquin, anything to add to that? That covered a lot. No, Sidus Masi.
No, it really did, Jesus Moñeka. I just wanted to add that it seems like and we'll get into the meat and potatoes and the rice and spam of it all very shortly. But I just wanted to add that it seems to be like this conference, even just talking with some people who have been there, some elders, Indigenous leaders that have been there ever since COP1. Um, Although it's a conference where there's a lot of policy written, there's also got to acknowledge there's not a lot to reinforce these policies and these conversations. And as it's a table being formed for certain countries to be invited, there's a lot being left out. So us as like a territory, some of that, but even some of the larger countries, you know, there's still a lot that needs to happen in order for real change to follow suit. So that's all that I really wanted to add. But yeah.
Sidus Masi. And so an obvious question is, of course, how did the two of you get out there? And, then so how, because, as we know, as Moñeka, as you were mentioning, there's no established route. Some people, of course, get a seat at the table. There's a nameplate for them, right? And so how in particular, what was the route? Was it through NGOs, nonprofits, grants? So what was the particular route that took the two of you out there? And were there any other Chamorros or people from the Marianas that made it out there as well?
Thank you for that question. And so Micronesia Climate Change Alliance became a member of the Climate Justice Alliance in 2019. And that's the first time I was extended an opportunity to attend the COP proceedings. And that was in Madrid at COP 25. And since then, and since my first foray into this world, this UN world. And then also we'll talk a little bit later, but there's lots of outside movement gatherings that we were also able to gain access to and join. And that was a lot more regenerative spaces and a lot more like aligned spaces. But MCCA was invited in 2020 or in 2019. I was invited to go. And since then we've sent with a bunch of different people. Sorry, I have a dispenser. So my 1-year-old is causing a ruckus here at the Guam Library. And he also traveled with me to COP, which is crazy to think that just to give context, like COP is usually 2 weeks long and it's incredibly intensive, like scheduling line. It was intense to just get there. It took over 40 hours to travel from Guam, 24 hours of which was actually sitting in a plane. I took my baby on a 7-hour flight to a 9-hour flight to another 9-hour flight. So it was like incredibly intense physically to try to manage that. And then we went straight into a dinner meeting after like 2 hours after landing. So it's not for the faint of heart. It definitely takes a lot of like social bandwidth and navigating really chaotic places and times and schedules. So there's just it's definitely not for everybody. It could be very, very draining to attend these meetings. But yeah, just got invited from really aligned an established movement family, movement for climate justice, for environmental justice, for global justice, and people who see and know that the system of the world is extractive and needs to change. And so the organizations that have sponsored us to continuously go, I went first in 2019. I think since then we've had 7 different people attend these meetings through the same sort of networks. And yeah, I would just want to give special thanks to Global Grassroots Justice and to the Indigenous Environmental Network and Climate Justice Alliance for always uplifting our presence in these spaces, because we're usually erased in these spaces.
No, si Zeus Masi and Donkulu na Biba no Hogwanai for the traveling nanas, you know, that is a major Magahaga achievement right there. Oof. And so Roquin, for you, how did you make the long trip out there?
Yeah, I mean, echoing what Moñeka said, I was actually very much had the honor and privilege to be invited by MCCA, not last year, just this past year to Brazil, but the year prior to go to Colombia as well. So I was there at COP29 as well as COP30. And that's so far been my involvement with these spaces.
Biba. Biba, no, Sidus Masi, Sidus Masi. I see we've already got a number of Sidus Masi. I'm looking around and we've already got a number of people that are tuning in from the States and the Marianas. And so I'm now, Angin Guaha question Mizu, if you have any questions, comment, put fabot. Let us know your comments. Let us know your questions. Again, all right. And so, yes, I will be sharing. Okay, somebody is asking for pictures. Yes, I'm downloading them. Hungan. I will be sharing some pictures. Hungan. I'm doing that right now. Esta hutungo. Esta hutungo hungan. All right. And so the first off, some people are asking, of course, about the protests. And so the first question that I have for the two of you is, what was it like being on the ground? Because it seemed, at least from videos and reporting, that there was an incredible amount of energy. Um, and when you think about climate change conferences, when you think about conferences, when you think about the United Nations, you think about stuffiness, you think about that. But the images and at least what people were hearing, there was this energy and there was this vibrancy. And so, what was your experience like? Did you feel this energy? And then, you know, this really is, I mean, the missing equation in so much of these discussions, Indigenous people, right? Indigenous people are this life that is missing from the world. And so, um, what was it like? Were you around? Did you participate in any of these actions, any of these types of activities? Moñeka, it looked like you might be changing a diaper. And so I'm not to presume anything. Okay. The angle there looked like you might be, but so I was gonna pass it off to Roquin, but okay, so Hadzi Fanetna, who wants to answer first? Moñeka, list out?
Sure.
Okay.
Um, and so also wanted to uplift that the UN is about nation states. So a lot of these states are settler colonial states on indigenous land and indigenous. So even though it represents all the nations of the world, not all the nations of the world have indigenous people's rights or their wants, and thus the environment's wants and needs at the center of their minds. And so this COP was deemed both the Just Transition COP and the Indigenous COP because of uh, the fact that a lot of Indigenous people were coming. And also this COP was the first COP in a few years that it's out of an authoritarian government. Roquin went to Colombia the year before, but that was for a different COP. That was for the COP on biodiversity, more focused on biological issues, not necessarily climate change. And so the COPs before this were in Azerbaijan, in the UAE, and then in Egypt. So all within like the Middle East area. And the local resistance and any resistance at COP was really squandered, and there was a lot of oppression happening to any sort of activists. And so this is the first time in years in which activists were able to mobilize and organize and come together globally alongside the COP. And so there was two events that brought together global activists, global advocates. One was the People's Caucus or the People's Summit. And then the other one that both Roquin and I went to was called the Movement of People Affected by Dams and Climate Change. And both of these were organized by long time, decades old movements in in Brazil, and Brazil has incredible agrarian, people-centered reforms that we could learn and build off of. And that was, I think, the highlight for me was really being able to be in these spaces with people who have decolonized and have really created deep democratic processes and gotten land for their community and have been able to fight off authoritarianism from around the world and visibilize the grassroots vision for an alternative future.
Oh, c'est justement assez. Roquin, por favor.
Yeah, I think, when we talk about who's missing, sometimes it's also who's silenced, right? I think us as Indigenous people for a long time, since time immemorial, we've been advocates for our rights, but largely we've been left out of conversations and spaces and any positions of power that we're able to actually create change and actually steward our communities, steward our lands, steward our waters. So I just wanted to kind of be like mindful of some of the language that we use because one thing that was also very apparent when touching the ground, I think sometimes we talk about like how hard it is to be an activist here in the Marianas, right? Like I think we often get pushback from like the general public online and everything, sometimes in person. But what became very much apparent is that in a large parts of like the other world, especially like throughout Latin America, it is very dangerous to be an activist. It is very dangerous to be an indigenous person. There are a lot of people who, have memorials for a lot of the activists that we have lost along the way, and some, as recent as just like the weeks leading up to it. And so and it's worth dying for, right? I think our causes and our land and our lands and our homes and our waters are worth dying for. Um, but that being said, like I think what was also like re-energizing and really beautiful to see was like the beautiful acts of solidarity, the network building. I think something that we haven't been a part of, right? I think sometimes when we look outside of our spaces and how great change is made, it's not just from governments, it's not just from those like bigger entities and those institutions granting us access. It's us as people organizing ourselves and orientating ourselves and giving us our own resources and building our own ways of having community. And that was very visible there, and in addition to like everything that we saw like online with the protests when people were charging like the security line, there was also a beautiful march that happened just like a few days shortly after where we really got to see people coming together holding arms. Me and Moñeka and Fanui were part of that. Um, and yeah, it was just like a lively experience to see. But at the same time, you can also, I'll call out some like little hypocrisy where, oh, okay, like yeah, we're in this march, and all these like indigenous leaders, they're looking strong, men, they're holding arms and they're marching down, but at the same time, like we are being bombarded by photographers and people that just think of us as photo ops when we wear regalia, and think of it as costume and think of it as performative, as opposed to a ceremony that we're holding, as opposed to like protection that we're calling for our homelands and our waters. And then there was also now we had to kind of have like almost like a little barrier in a way, and it was held down by a lot of like indigenous women and women in general. And that was just interesting like sight to see, right? Because we also amplify dynamics that sometimes we don't always want to replicate, right? From empire and from colonialism. But at the same time, like there's still ways in which like our indigenous ways of being are still being presented, are still being preserved, are still being perpetuated, and really keep that fire going. So it's a lot, right? Like as Moñeka said earlier, it's a lot energetically, it's a lot socially, but it is very recharging and energizing because I think coming from the Marianas in a way, like I feel like we're people that kind of have those like blinders on and we're so focused on, what the US is and everything and all that. And we forget to look around to each other at times. And this was a beautiful space to be welcomed into by so many Indigenous folks and solidarity building and actually even wanting us there, right? I think what became so apparent was that, like, oh, we've been missing voices from the Pacific. We've been missing Micronesian voices. Like, what's going on in your neighborhood, right? Like, they know us in a way by our reputation that precedes us as a military base. And there's already somewhat this like desire for connection and understanding and empathy. But there was a lot of times I just had to point to where the Marianas was on a map and like unleash the history. But I think as culture ambassadors, that's our point, right? Is that we're supposed to be sharing our stories. We're supposed to be sharing um, what we have to offer to the world. And I think this is one of the ways in which that we can do that. Tiny but mighty. And here we are, thousands of kilometers away in Brazil. And one of the acts of solidarity that I saw that was really beautiful as well was there was also a parade of boats. And, some boats, not gonna lie, like party boat, playing samba, just having a good time. And other boats you could see very much like paddled by indigenous people, like boats that I paddle with, every time I'm in Tuman Bay. And so to see that and be a part of that and wave the Guam flag and everything just really meant a lot to be recognized, right? Because oftentimes when we think about like, oh, I want representation here, I want us to be seen there, why aren't we there? And I think for me, my attitude is like sometimes you just got to be the representation you want to see. If not you, then who? If not now, then when, right? As the quote goes. So it was just a beautiful way to kind of bring our people and our not only our struggle, but our light for hope and a better future with other people as well. To see that we do have a lot more in common than what we have as differences. So, yeah.
Biba, Biba. Now, I want to, Moñeka, you shared some photos with me, and so I wanted to put them up, and then if either of you kind of want to talk about them, Estige Hamzo, then gaigi si James Viernes Lokwe. But James
Yeah,
was there in a different capacity though,
oh
right?
yeah. So James Vernez actually works for one of the bigger collectives of the Pacific now. He was formerly with the Center for Pacific Island Studies at UH Manoa, and before that, the University of Wuhan. And he's one of an amazing Chamorro scholar and historian from the village of Sumai. So really grateful for all the work that they're doing now to not just uplift the Marianas, but the entire Pacific. And they work with the Pacific Island Climate Action Network now, or PCAN. And he was inside COP almost the entire time, whereas Roquin and I spent very little time in the place that set fire. Roquin was there, I think, the day that the fire happened. Like one of the last few days of COP, there was a fire at the venue. And the venue was like all temporary, sort of like tents, but fancier tents, really large tents, and it's huge. We both got probably like 10 to 20,000 steps a day, just navigating the different spaces and areas that we had to travel between. And James was really holding it down for the people who had negotiation status. We only go as observers of the proceedings, but James was actually had party status, so he was able to go and actually help the negotiators and be of service to those who were inside the rooms who were negotiating the protocols that we hope to enact, especially around loss and damage and some other important holding down the line for Indigenous and Pacific rights.
Oh, oh wow.
And this photo is right after this was at the Indigenous Peoples Caucus. And so even though it's mostly nation states that have rights at the tables, the Indigenous peoples, international Indigenous peoples do have a caucus that meets throughout the year to sort of prepare for every COP and oversee COP to ensure that it doesn't infringe upon the rights of Indigenous people as outlined by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so we applied to have a side event focusing on the Marianas and our trench and our peoplehood within the confines of the UN COP30 space. And this is probably the very first Chamorro-centric conversation at any COP before. And so I've attended, this was my third COP, and so it was a dream of mine to hold a sort of teach-in about what's happening from the Marianas. And yeah, and we had a lot of our movement family from Turtle Island and from throughout the Pacific that came, and most of them never knew of our historic struggles as one of the longest held colonies. They didn't know about what our role is right now in upholding empire, and all the militarization that we're experiencing. And so it was a big learning moment, and something that we should definitely celebrate, to have had such representation and such great response from our family in the Pacific, and in the social justice movement in the United States.
Mhm. Iade
I just
hadzistinanin.
also want to quickly say that, like, so over at the Oceanic Pavilion as well, there was one day in particular, where it was just like very heavy rains. And so the tent itself had like kind of burst open, like there was a leak. And so the Oceanic tent and like delegation space had flooded. And I was like, wow, even here at COP, we gotta be looking out for these rising waters. Like climate change is real, y'all. Yeah, and then later on, just a few days after, there was a fire, an electrical fire that had broken out and quickly consumed a large part of like another part of the conference area. But by rain, by fire, I think I always think of its ancestors just kind of speaking through and calling out, some people louder than others at times, but.
Oh, Sidus Masi. We just got a comment, Sidus Masi Roquin and Moñeka, for representing, networking, and advocating for our people community of Guahan. Hey, they Sidus Masi Albert for your comment. And so, ooh. And so we have more, Afestisiha. What is this? Koesti Amut? Koesti
Oh
Lanyanminzo
yeah, one of the
Kafesti?
best experiences
Moñeka, what is this?
Yeah, this is one of the best experiences of this COP and going to the People's Summit was they had a People's Market. And so one thing that's really cool about South America is that they have a lot of different cooperatives and organizations that are reclaiming medicine ways and reclaiming textiling and even tattooing. And there was this really vibrant marketplace that always had musicians playing, had live art with people getting some indigenous stain. And then this is just some medicine. There's vendors of all types of agricultural goods as well as candy crafts. And so, yeah, the market was just such an amazing place. There was also a fully indigenous marketplace called the Adea that also had really amazing Amazonian handicrafts. And yeah, that was the art, the culture, the cultural exchange. There was people from every single continent in these spaces sharing their struggles and sharing their messages of hope and their strategies for building anew. That were just incredibly. I feel incredibly blessed to have been there with my little 1-year-old with, to just absorb, so hopefully that he absorbs that energy and knows that as much as the future seems daunting and challenging, there's millions of people across the world standing up for the right for this planet to remain life-giving into his future.
Gan. Ungan. Ooh. We have more images from Hafesti. Oh, is this from a demonstration of some sort or
Yes, that was from our March protest, the one that I was kind of talking about with like the
oh,
indigenous leaders kind of hand in hand. Yeah. And funny
Yeah,
enough, I think that photographer, or there was a number of photographers, but they were just being very entitled. Like I work with a lot of photographers that are very, very nice. Um, some of them were just very rude, getting up right in our faces and saying how this is like their job and all this and all that. Well, this is their lives, here at stake. So I think it's a little bit more important than your camera at that particular point in time. But yeah, a lot of mixed
yeah.
emotions, a lot of charged energy there.
Yeah, so this was the first like People's Summit, People's March for Mother Earth in 3 years, and over 200,000 people came out. It was like a 6 kilometer march. It was long, it was hot, and it was definitely challenging, but there is so much joy even in the face of all the challenges. And one thing about this COP, especially after that day when the Indigenous people charged the entrance, was that it became more heavily militarized than any other COP before. So you would see people in full on like assault rally gear. I don't even know how to explain it, but it was definitely, this space was so counter and so beautiful to be a part of in the face of all of that militarization of the actual cop space. This was walking through the streets of Belem and really playing a lot of music, shouting a lot of liberatory chants in Portuguese and Spanish and English, and yeah, just really trying to share solidarity across the world. It was really, really wonderful to see it. We didn't even know like where the beginning, where the end was. It was just an immense march.
Wow, then Hafa Este, what is this?
Oh, those are acai seeds.
Oh.
Acai, which of course Mighty Purple and Hafaloha have made really like popular here on the island. So it's Belem is actually Pata, the state that we went to, that Belem is in, is like the global exporter of acai. And so there were so many acai shops. They eat it so differently from the way that we eat it here. They don't eat it frozen. It's more like a soup, and they also eat it with like fish. And so they had acai everywhere, and this was just like the processed berries already that were just on the street outside of a acai place right within the march that I just took a picture of.
Yeah, I gotta say because so acai like it grows like from a palm, and there's a very like short season, a very short window for them to that they produce fruit, and we happen to be there at that time. And normally when they export it, the window for them from like harvesting to export is very short, like 24 hours on the market max, and then it has to be like frozen, and then that's how it's packaged and exported to the rest of the world. So we consume it normally outside of Brazil in a way of like frozen with fruit, kind of like ice cream, like in that kind of way. But they buy it in just these like little bags. It's fresh. They also do this thing where they like grate like tapioca, sometimes other kind of starches as well. And then once they pan fry that, then they kind of add it on there. So it's almost like a flake, almost like what's an equivalent? Like a little like
A
grain added
granola.
on
It's like
top.
a
Like it's
the
almost like a
Amazonian.
granola.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually like very bitter. And so there's a lot of people that they add like sugar, they add honey. So they also eat it with fresh fruit, but as Moñeka mentioned earlier too, like they also eat it with some proteins. And them being like along the river and along the coast, it's mostly fish, but there's sometimes where they eat it with beef, with pork. But yeah, to have it fresh changed my life. I can't eat it any other way anymore. Like, I'm changed. There's a life that I lived before acai and the life that I live after. Like,
Well,
I want to go right here. Yeah,
I look forward to you opening then a rival to Mighty Purple then. The real acai.
yeah, yeah. Give me a few years, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
Oh wow, I that was a no, I found that intriguing because I think to have so many indigenous people gathered in one place, and especially to have so many of them dressed in their regalia, sort of and then to have so many photographers, yeah, and videographers and stuff. But that's so good to hear that that the indigenous people, you were pushing back and sort of like insisting on respect, because I can imagine for a lot of those photographers, it's like, oh, this is like a gold mine for me. So much color, so much culture. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna go viral. I'm gonna
I know,
go
but
Yeah.
you would
viral
have
from all
probably
of this
taken like
culture.
70,000 photos if you were there.
Every day,
Oh yeah,
every day. Like
but it's
as we should, right? But I think there are some people that are coming from our own communities that it's important to self-document, history being made. At the same time, I think there are just some
mm,
people that have still very predatory and colonial ways about and
yeah,
extractive ways of photographing, in this
yeah,
part here, you know.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
I think I think even I from what you've told me about some of the stuff that was going on there, it's a mix of public demonstrations, but also, some of it is more sacred and some of it is more solemn.
Yeah.
And you don't want people photographing everything, and some of it too is, I think, you want to share it with the people you're in solidarity with. You don't want to share it with somebody's 10,000 Instagram followers or somebody's network media and stuff. And so I like that you brought that into the discussion, because I don't, for those images that traveled, I don't think a lot of people cared. So I'm glad though that you brought that up. And so with the time that we have left though, I wanted to with the time that we have left though, I wanted to kind of talk about what was the result of kind of COP 30, because um I think at least, within the United States, we've seen with the Trump administration, for example, a lot of environmental programs being pushed back, um, a lot of, green energy projects, which weren't even life-changing to begin with, now are like the devil, according to the Trump administration. And so, what was the feeling coming out of it, though? For those of you who are on the ground, did people feel, others that you were connected to, did they feel like it was successful? Did they feel um, that you achieved goals, or did they feel like there was still so much to be done? What was your feeling, Moñeka?
Oh, yeah, I think, the rise of authoritarianism and the rise of the political right is something that's being felt around the world. And so in the movement spaces that we were at, the People Summit and at um, the international encounter for the communities affected by dams and climate change, of which Roquin and I were the very first people from the Pacific to attend their meetings, and this was the fourth one that they held. Just learning from people on the ground who have very similar values of wanting to respect ancestors and water and land and be in more right relationship with the earth was such a powerful thing for the both of us to experience and to be representatives of the Marianas in these spaces. Sorry, he has a lot to say too. He was there. Yeah, I think just advancing the message of care and the narrative of responding to the current political climate and the escalating attacks on our communities was one that there's a global community that's been through similar struggles, and that there's a need to consolidate support, and be more connected and introduce interventions that have worked in other places and create better processes from the local to the global, around divesting from militarization and violence, and investing in care and resilience.
Jesus Masi and Rokin, para algo?
Yeah. I think just piggyback off like what Muñeca said, as well as like what we've all discussed so far, is like it's one of those things, I guess, like it's hard to measure success in that moment because it is a converging point for so many movements, but at the same time, like the movement still goes on, right? At the end of the 2 weeks, we all go back home and then we continue the good fight. But I think what was successful for me was really just reiterating, like to really see those acts of like solidarity and really expand the empathy that, like, yeah, I kind of already had, like, as a person that wants to be an advocate for our islands and for our waters, but to really step into the act of solidarity by showing up to those kinds of demonstrations, by talking to those leaders, I think it really made me understand like a bigger history. And one of the things that I wanted to share before we hop off really quickly was like, funny enough, the mango streets were lining Belem and everything, and I was feeling that kind of like, yeah, we were colonized by the Spanish, but we're still here. I still feel like I'm, back home in a way. But one of the things that I would constantly see is, I don't want to say it was the Nunu tree per se, but it was definitely some kind of tree that was related where they would just pop up here and there, here and there, and it was just such a beautiful metaphor to feel like I'm walking in the space where we see the Nunu roots. Like expand all over the world and here in Belem as well. And I was actually also very fortunate and privileged to share a little bit over at the People Summit. And one of the analogies that I brought up, not only that was like, but also with the boat is like, they say if you want to go somewhere fast, you go alone, but if you want to go somewhere far, you go together. And to see all those boats together and, you got to paddle, on the same beat and the same rhythm, and you got to understand where you're going and how you're going to get there. There's many different boats that you can hop on. You don't got to be in my boat. You could be in yours. But when we actually go together, that's when I think we're able to go to the horizon and make that a home, right? And the future is a place for us just as much as anybody else. And to constantly be working towards that and be returning home and continuing that was really awe-inspiring to kind of just even zoom out a little bit more and understand and recontextualize our roles here back home. And they say think local, or what is it? Think globally, act locally, right? And another one that also stuck with me is that there is no revolution without translation. And so what that means is making it accessible for people because not only socioeconomic but like different languages around the world, like people want to connect, people are connected, they want to see us there, right? And so I just want to like affirm our people in that, like it may seem daunting, it may seem that there are other members of our own community that are against us, but I think if we really do listen to our own hearts and we listen to the struggles of people around the world and we are attuned to the pain that our islands are enduring right now, but also the beauty, also the resilience, also the triumph. I think that's when we really recognize our own truth as Chamorro people, as people that call the Marianas home, as people that call this world home, as people, period. So I think it was very successful in the way of us showing up and us being able to bring back these stories home and continue the movement work. Just wanting to shout out like NCCA for their beautiful exhibit at the Guam Museum right now. Go check it out. Mu, Sacred Waters. Yeah, I think we see echoes of that message everywhere. We just have to know where to look, and that's one place you can find it. So, yeah.
Sidzus Masi, Sidzus Masi. Hi, day Hungan. Bonito eno isinangan mo. It's a beautiful way to end this episode. Sidzus Masi no Hamzuna dos. Thank you so much for going all the way to Brazil. 40 hours of travel. Zan Moñeka hago un kokoni na lahimo. Oy, de wow. Mesngun hao Hungan. Lohu agradeci Hamzu. I appreciate both of you because when you don't have a seat at the table, that's when it's more important that you make sure you're banging on the door. Hungan. And so thank you so much. Si Diyos masi por Hamzu na dos, pero ifinatumidzo za Hamzu todos ni umeigad za numeikung esti finakpo este episode Fanachu. Adios. Este